Thank you for joining this session in Season 2 of the Technical Empowerment Series. Season 2 is focused on the power of best practices. I'm your host, Kari Greguska, and today I'm joined by Rachel Stevens, Senior Industry Analyst at RedMonk, and SADA's very own CTO, my fearless leader, Miles Ward. Hey, Rachel. Hey, Miles. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, let's start with just some basic housekeeping intros. Tell the audience a little bit about yourselves. Rachel, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'm Rachel Stevens. As Kari said, I'm an industry analyst at RedMonk, and it's a kind of nebulous job. Part of it is like saying it depends a lot, which it does. Really what I do is I help my clients and the industry at large track and contextualize technology adoption trends. And in particular at RedMonk, we try to look at the world through the lens of the practitioner and the user of the technology. We totally understand that software is a team sport. Like, it's not just one persona that matters. It's not just one persona that's responsible for getting software out the door. And so we care about the ops people, we care about the data people, we care about the architects and the management. Like, all of those people are definitely part of the world that we pay attention to. But really the lens that we focus on a lot is the lens of the developer.
Super excited for the conversation. And Miles, a little intro from you.
Sure. I'm CTO here at SADA. We are Partner of the Year 5 years in a row for Google Cloud, help companies implement Workspace and GCP and Maps and Chrome and all the different parts of the Google ecosystem. I ran the solutions architecture function in Google Cloud for 5 years, so been pretty hands-on with that. And I was the 5th solutions architect worldwide at AWS. So plenty of context about how those clouds work. Here at SADA, that means bringing the capabilities that are present in Google's enormously innovative platform and actually getting customers to be able to successfully use them. That last mile can be harder than people imagine. And having a big team of incredible engineers to plug in and help them think through what is the change going to look like? What is the actual technical steps that have to happen? How do we follow through on that to get to the outcomes they're trying to achieve is our focus.
Great. So you two have a working relationship prior to this discussion today. Yeah. Let's kind of set the stage. Rachel, how long have you been working with SADA in particular and in the cloud services space?
Yeah, so I've been at RedMonk for 6.5 years, and we kind of have been very much part of the cloud ecosystem. In my role of kind of understanding the technology landscape, it's a huge part of what we have to do. In terms of knowing SADA, I feel like I just have known Miles via the internet for a really long time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a nebulous answer. I'm not really sure when the formal relationship started versus just being internet friends, but it's been good.
There are a lot more of those internet friends now that we all have this enforced separation as a result of the pandemic. So I think we're all getting better and better at being that kind of friend.
Yeah. No, it's the best part of the last couple of years is keeping those relationships and feeling like you know each other. So, and then Miles, you've been at SADA for almost 3 years.
3.5.
3.5. Okay.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about how it's changed in your time.
Tony would introduce us as the world's largest workspace implementation partner that sometimes does Maps and occasionally GCP. Now we are the world's largest GCP implementation partner and have a great Workspace and Maps product. That shift in capability stands on the back of multiplication of our staff by a factor of 7, a multiplication of our revenue by a lot larger number. And we've done a lot to move from, hundreds of customers doing this kind of work to thousands. So there's a lot that we were not capable of 3 years ago that we are doing daily now, which is pretty exciting transformation to see.
Wow, 7x team growth in 3 years is a lot. That's a lot of cultural change, not only just product change.
Oh yeah, I think every time you go through about a factor of 4, every person has to imagine if they stayed at the same spot that spot is now an utterly different job. A different job. So I'm on job number 2. I'm looking forward to job number 3. It starts about February next year. So it'll be a fun ride.
And so sorry, I'm totally stealing Kari's job as the moderator.
That's what these things are for.
So I was curious though, because you talked about like your focus area within GCP shifting. What had to shift along with it, like in your internal practices? What had to shift to make that happen? Like not only the hiring had to change, like what else had to change at SADA to make that work?
Sure. I mean, let's take like kind of a narrow example. A lot of the practice at the very beginning was almost exclusively about building something new on top of GCP, because we were building things new on top of maps. We were building things new on top of App Engine, right? That was an application development environment. As I came in and spent more time with operations teams, with folks that are in infrastructure management, that we added a whole huge bulk of migration work and kind of replatforming, re-engineering work to the mix. And so those are new skills. That's kind of different onboarding, different training for those folks. You have a kind of a higher bias to experience with prior systems. You're not, leaning exclusively on the kind of most bleeding edge of software development. And you also had to do work on our side to get to like coherent project management. It feels more like product management when you're kind of building a new thing for a customer. You're working a roadmap. You're kind of continuing to validate the demand on their side for different features or capabilities. When it's a project and you've got a deadline and a timeline, it's a different management style. We brought in people to form a PMO. We ended up then beyond that building a whole change management organization kind of modeled on the way that we were doing it in Workspace. Imagine how hard it is for most companies to change the way they email each other. It's maybe slightly easier to change the way maybe that they do deployments for infrastructure. So we built a change management function. We built a whole resource management function on our side, went from those are the smart nerds, you should talk to them about your move, to tracking 290 distinct technical skills and having a good way of like laying out which team members you would need to be able to successfully do an implementation. And then a whole bunch of that got vastly more mature as you went from like hand built, hand configured SOWs to like, okay, several of these start to look the same. All right, let's have like a program, a practice that's starting to squirt out, consistent offers to customers.
Gosh, that starts to, it's like project management and product management and program management kind of all flex different muscles, and it feels like you've got all of those going at the same time.
Yeah, you have to. It like if management is what we brought as basically the big change, it just has a bunch of different P's at the front of it to respect to the various problems.
Yeah. Different groups, but all talented people working together. So you used the phrase in there, modeling one after the other, and we kind of set some standards in one group and took it over to the next and applied it there. That kind of leads me to the topic of best practices, the focus of this episode. If I say the term best practices, what does that mean to each of you?
Do you want to go first or me? Okay, so I want to be careful about how I answer this, because I feel like, given that this is the series title, I don't want to be overly negative. I do think best practice implies, in some circles anyways, that there's only one way to do things. It's like, this is the best way, this is the way. And I think a lot of times, like in technology in particular, it's just like patently untrue. There's a lot of different ways to get there. So like the phrase I kind of like, and I think anyone who's been in this space long enough to have realized that there is no such thing as best practices, like, but what it captures is essentially like proven methodologies, which I think is really important. So these are the approaches and the processes and like the selection of tools that work well together. And we recommend that you try that too. And so like, I do think that the concept is really important. Sometimes I think the phrase itself can get twisted in a way that distorts its meaning. But I do think it's a really important thing. It's like, let's learn from each other. We don't all have to make the same mistake. We don't all have to reinvent the wheel. So I think that's really important. Second part of the thing, so that's kind of the word best in best practices. I think practices in and of itself implies that you're not working on a point solution, but you're thinking about things more holistically, and you're not just trying to drop in individual pieces, but you're trying to think about how everything integrates together. And I think there's plenty of time for us to talk about that later, but I think together, both of them are really important, and you just have to make sure that you're setting the same context for everyone around you.
Yeah, I really agree. I think just like DevOps now has been sort of abused to the point of non-recognition and has like 11 different definitions, and that it is easy for folks who are either commercially operating in this space or whose promotion is dependent on some of these words. They're going to end up constantly jockeying around the edges. One of the, I think, most visible quote unquote best practices in the market is a thing at Amazon called the well-architected framework. I wrote the very, very first parts of that framework, and they are not best practices at all. It is a list of worst practices. It was a checklist built for Reddit to tell them what not to do, because they were doing all of the things we could think of that were a horrible idea. Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you put everything in a single zone? What is wrong with you? Why do you just arbitrarily kill instances to test the sort of availability of what is wrong with you? Why are you like arbitrarily inserting errors inside of your, the SQS request messages, like all this other kind of stuff? Why do you only have exactly one key? What's wrong with you people, right? So we laid out this whole list of stuff to teach them. They, of course, systematically ignored all of it. But we thought it might make sense to show to other customers. They liked it an awful lot. And then it was some smart marketer who said, like, this is an awfully negative list. Could you put it in the positive maybe? That'd be great. And we're like, oh, sure. Okay.
That makes good sense.
Yeah. That adds up. So, but I do think it's very often that, the highest utility of both experienced people and the best practices that they would evaluate is to help close likely very bad branches you might investigate. Like, down there is dragons, I promise. Yes. Let's all work on this area in the left and see if we can go faster. So that's been a spot where we stay as focused as we can is rather than saying like there's only one true way, because like of course nobody believes that, because the cloud providers have 11 different ways of running.
So many ways.
We're like so many different ways to do the different thing, right? Like is this a database? I don't know. You can do pulls and gets and like okay, like maybe it is. So there's a lot where it's more about closing off the things that are going to be a problem.
Exactly, and I think that's an interesting point is that not only are there so many different potential products that you can be using, but there's so much legacy that everyone is bringing. Everyone's bringing a different pile of technology to the table. Everybody has a different goal in mind of where they're trying to go, and everyone has a different budget. And so when you kind of put all of these things together, there's no one best. But I very much agree with your concept that there are definitely worsts.
Yeah, there are wrong choices. We when we started, right, like you were talking about the kind of maturity of SADA over time. I come on board. I had just come over from Google. I'm used to things being gigantic. I look around, I go, okay, look, I want to read all the SOWs that we've ever produced, and we'll put these into categories and we'll make them into products. It'll be awesome. And then I read the SOWs, and there are no two that are even remotely the same. I mean, they do not rhyme. They are and I was like, okay, so we wait a year, and then I build a couple of packages of stuff, and I'm hoping, okay, maybe these will work. They don't work. We don't sell a single one of them. Now they triple the custom SOW request rate. That we had solved the problem ever was awfully good evidence that maybe we could solve some other problem. So, okay, off to the races we go, helping people solve their sort of custom problem. Now at some 1,000 successfully completed professional services SOWs, we have enough of them where there are 16 and 18 of them that rhyme. And you're like, oh, okay, let's get those written down. And that's starting to work. We're seeing a pretty material fraction flow that way. But it takes way more examples than you'd expect because of how radically diverse the ecosystem is.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. With that, so we talked a little bit about the cloud provider's list of what not to do, and then SADA being in the service provider space, and we have, these 18 SOWs kind of look alike. What is the weight of the platform itself to bear the responsibility or the enforcement of those best practices compared to a service provider?
Well, I think that's that is the $1 million question. I think everybody's grappling with this. I would love to hear your answer of how you have chosen to grapple with this, and then I can chime in.
So I think there are problems that customers have that the cloud provider shares and that they have the applied experience to actually write down what a useful way of doing it is. So like we have a customer of ours, they're an alliance partner. They build a managed MariaDB database service on top of GCP. It's called SkySQL. Works great. And you can imagine if the Cloud SQL people at Google would spit out the best practices for running a relational database on top of GCP, the MariaDB people would really want to read that paper. Like they absolutely have the applied experience to say the right answers in the right way. They're probably doing it pretty dang big. They have a bunch of telemetry that feels very similar. That is perfect. And when they say like, here's how you build a startup, you go, weird. No, I don't know. You guys have the $1 trillion garage in which to build startups. Maybe you don't have quite the same context as the rest of us, right? So, you want to look for, at least for me, the places where the practitioner is able to articulate from a position of direct experience. And that's something that is going to be a gap for some of the providers because they aren't in all the lines of business that their customers are in. They're not solving all the kinds of problems that those companies are solving.
Yeah, and so that's interesting because you take the question even further and says not only just how much should this be a platform, but how much should you have kind of vertical solutions within that platform for different lines of business and industries and things. And then it just gets like exponentially more difficult when you start to, there's just this fractalization of all of the possible solutions.
I mean, this was literally my role at Google Cloud. I was in charge of solutions architecture and I had a smart manager. His name was Bruce, really nice guy, also a sousaphone player, which suggests a sort of alignment of excellence there. And his question is like, well, this is lame. How many solutions are there total? Like, how close are we to done? I was like, oh, that's kind of rad. So we started beating up a whiteboard and writing down all the different use cases we could think of in all the different contexts we could think of them. We stopped at 2,700 of them. We just kind of gave up. And we're like, this is getting obnoxious. We're never going to get 2,700 of these things done. Now Google has about 600 of them. And the last time I talked with them, they said, could you help us like clean these up and like tidy it a little bit? It's too hard. And the challenge is if you're an end implementing customer, right? I see how much stuff gets copied out of Stack Overflow. I see how much of this you're just trying to find the right answer. You got too many people with so much pressure trying to get the thing done that they're trying to get done. And they need guidance that is extremely specific to their scene. So there's a delta there. There's a gap.
I think, so there's a challenge that people have. So when we're talking about like what's going on between like how our cloud providers talking about best practices is like, I think they're inherently fairly generalized because they're trying to help kind of do this majority guidance path. But it means that there's the more prescriptive they get and the more opinionated they get, like the more it kind of narrows their funnel of possible use cases. And like most cloud providers are not interested in narrowing their funnel. And then the other thing that we have is that I think one of like the DNA portions of cloud that has changed in recent years, but it's like this concept of self-service. And people feel like they should be able to come to the cloud and they should be able to like throw their bucket of parts together and make their own solution. And so if you have kind of these like broad paths that customers can take that you're trying to guide people down, like this is like generally the right direction. And then you have people trying to put all these pieces together on their own, and you're trying to kind of walk that line between giving people control and customization and also kind of giving them a path, or giving them customization and then giving them control and trying to figure out where am I actually following on that spectrum. What it means is that the cloud providers are really kind of trying to walk a very thin line of like how to serve the most people the most effectively. And it's a really hard thing to do. But what we've seen there is that it's opened up like this other part of the market that has come around the edges. So we've seen like things like Vercel and Netlify, Cloudflare Pages is probably in there, like Render, Shopify Hydrogen maybe for some use cases. So it's like we're starting to see like these platforms that are trying to attract this certain class of workload and these certain use cases onto their platforms because like, hey, this is going to be easier to do. We can take some of the heavy lifting off of you trying to like scaffold all of this together yourself. And now the cloud providers are trying to say like, okay, like how do we respond to that? And like, what is our path forward if we're not just all primitives all the time? Like, what is the path forward if we start to put together like actual products and platforms and programs and things like that? And so I think that's where everyone's at is what does that look like?
Yeah, if, you have to imagine, I'm in this conversation with Eric Schmidt. At the time we were working together on the Obama campaign in 2012. And he was I didn't recognize him. He was, a person coming and asking questions, and I'm good at answering questions. And his question was, why isn't this all on App Engine? And I was like, oh, well, it can't be. You have to use all this open source software. A bunch of this stuff we didn't build. We're sort of compositing it together. And he thought that was pretty fascinating. We got into a fight, and voila, I look at Google. But a bunch of these platforms, they feel like Heroku. They feel like App Engine. And, some of those ideas were maybe like a little early. And so it's fun to watch, everything sort of comes back around. I want it more complex, more capable of nuance. I want it less complex. I want to make it simpler and easier. I want it more complex. So I think very often, when we're working with customers, some of these things they're not arbitrary choices, but at some point you just have to pick and go. And that's the shape that you have. I think as companies are trying to preserve flexibility, trying to preserve optionality, they are necessarily preserving some level of friction and overhead. And conveniently, the friction and overhead is coming down over time. So same issues happen, whether it's, do you build your own dev platform or do you use somebody else's? Do you use only one cloud? Do you use multi-cloud? Each of these areas are, I think, really painful business choices. And I don't think coming from a single cloud provider, you have much of a viable say in those, right? Like, companies need to make their own call about their strategies for these things that are effectively beyond the single provider.
Yeah, I loved your comment about Heroku though. So I feel like we've had so many more conversations around Heroku in the last couple of years than we had in like the decade leading up to now. Yeah. It's like that pendulum swinging between we want packaged solutions. We want less overhead in terms of getting this all put together ourselves. But feels like it's like this concept of nostalgia, like Heroku the dream, more so than Heroku the actual product.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. 100%.
It's been really fun to watch people try to grapple with what do we actually want out of our platforms, and what does that look like? And I don't think we've
how much was Heroku how much was Heroku glorious because the operational experience at scale was great, or because the graphic design in the UI was rather lovely and it was dark mode very early on, which made me feel comfortable, right? I don't know. Maybe it's kind of both, right? So I see all the time, I don't know how many startups a day that are basically alternative visualizations for a different user context of exactly the information that sits inside the cloud providers, right? They're features, and they're features that are going to make money because people want to see this stuff from their perspective in a way that they understand. I was talking with one of the product managers for Google's console, and he's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to add? And I was like, nope, I want the subtraction button. What are all the features that I can turn off so I see less stuff that I'm likely not to use? He's like, oh, so you don't like the console as advertising system? I was like, correct, I do not. You have a website for that. Go make the website better. The console is mine. It's my tool. Make it so that it is narrow to the needs that I have. And that's stuff that I think they will get a lot further on a lot faster, but it doesn't get all the way down to being enough mine to have internalized all this third party stuff that came over and the legacy stuff that sits at my existing business. The more the consoles reach over to absorb and accommodate the needs of their actual users, the better they'll behave.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've been grappling with is we've watched the growth of projects like Backstage, where this is really fascinating. It's awesome. It's got a lot of traction from people and companies that we respect a lot. And so it's great. One of our questions I was always why does this even need to exist? Why can't the cloud providers actually build this functionality themselves? And it's a tricky thing to get the right information in the right context to the right people. It's just hard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it's friends of ours from Spotify that were the ones that stood Backstage up. It's a team member at SADA that led the migration from Spotify to GCP. So Peter Mark, who's a nice guy. Bad at karaoke though. I'll just give him that right off the gate.
Sorry, Peter.
That sucks to be you. So
I've witnessed it.
but it is a spot where that's the one step removed, where as a not responsible for all of the mechanics of the cloud provider, for the physical logistics, for metric tons, for the hard drives and all the rest of the mayhem they have to sort with. If you can just be thinking about a specific customer profile and you think there's enough of them to do this work for, marvelous. You can build radically more useful interfaces and capabilities. And that same thing happens with us, right? Like I have a power package that's relatively narrow to groups of folks that are running hundreds to thousands of installations of an environment because they have offices or restaurants or stadiums or these different facilities. How do you make all of those have a computing infrastructure that works together? That's different. That's harder than some of the other stuff. And that's not the big market. Like I think the biggest market's probably people that are building apps for SaaS, but it is a market and I got people that need to know how to do that stuff. So, okay, look, let's walk you through how Anthos works for that problem. What are the ways to make it so that that is scalable and simple? And there's a bunch of others where it's that little bit extra narrowness gives enough specificity for customers to recognize themselves in the solution. That's me. That's what I'm trying to do. Finally, they're talking about my stuff.
Yeah.
You guys are both talking about the options and the platforms available and then those specific users, which makes me think of just different departments within the same organization. So like as a service provider, we might enter into a relationship with like the IT department, but there's plenty we could do in the marketing analytics side with their marketing department that we don't have a relationship with. How do you see service providers or even the cloud providers targeting those different users within the same organization that maybe don't have the same or unified decision-making power?
You're just all about the $1 million questions today, Kari.
She's got the good one.
How do I sell to more people into like a broadened like set of persona? Like it's a really challenging thing. And how do I expand who I'm marketing to without alienating my existing base? How do I know what a new base wants? Like those are what everyone is grappling with to try to figure that out. I think generally speaking, trying to get moving out of the realm of like the engineering sphere into like the business user sphere is kind of like a holy grail of the technology world. It's like we would love to sell not just to this business unit, but to all of the business units. And I think you are very much right that marketing is one of those beachheads. One, because I think that there is just a little bit of a clearer path of like a causal thing of A to B, and this creates revenue kind of thing. So like you can build those ROIs in like marketing and sales worlds a little bit easier than you can for like a nebulous like GA function within the business. And also you just like you have when you're doing something that's top of line versus bottom line, like top of line is usually where companies are like, yes, I would love to grow my revenue. That sounds like a great idea. So I feel like it's tricky to start to do that, but like the marketing analytics front is so amazingly advanced right now in terms of what people are doing in that world, in terms of segmenting things out, trying to A/B test, and like actually having the ability to pull those people into what we're doing in the engineering world. So it's not like an engineer or an engineering manager who's deciding like this feature is ready to be released, but now we can say, okay, like the marketing team is ready for this to release. And can we give them the ability to have more of a say in what's happening and when something actually pushes live? And can we give them a say on how we kind of A/B test this or push various like progressive portions of the traffic into different things, and we can test the results along the way? And I think all of that stuff is what some of these advanced organizations are trying to figure out, kind of this evolution of CI/CD into a phase where we have more people involved in the organization in terms of what's being delivered, and we have a little bit more control over how that's happening. And I think that's a really important step that a lot of engineering organizations are eventually going to take, but I think we're really early in that happening overall.
Yeah, I heartily agree. I mean, a little back to that kind of Doug Cutting version where he says that Google's living in the future and sending us messages back. He was talking about Hadoop, but or MapReduce at the time. There is almost no department that you would recognize as a similar department from other companies. You were talking about the marketing department. That's a great example, but certainly human resources, security, the folks that are doing work in supply chain management and vendor management at a company like Google. Of course, each of those departments are staffed with software engineers who will, of course, be using tools like this to automate any part of the workflow that becomes consistent enough to be automated. So That's foreign. You go to normal companies and they're like, software dev that sits in marketing. What? Like, no, they sit with the software developers. Why would you do that? Like,
and for so long that was just like denigrated as like shadow IT. Like, who is this person over there who has capabilities that I didn't approve of? Like, hold on.
You're not supposed to do that on your marketing laptop, right? Like, so that stuff, that is a sea change in the level of capability that companies get as a result of earning those powers, but also the complexity of management and the risk profile and all the rest of it, right? Like, the IT comes from a discipline of boundaries, the crunchy outer shell, and haves and have not, and all of that as a way to try and mitigate risk. And you can see all over some of the places where I think there are very real, actual best practices, like Beyond Corp as one example. Like, it is not going to work for you to secure a perimeter of literally anything. You are going to have to authenticate every action, and you're going to want to do that in a way that is cryptographically secure. So, like, okay, like that, like, there's a best practice, like an actual one. Now, the technology that you use to implement such a best practice is a separate question. There's a bazillion competitors and they all sort of work on that stuff, but that's different. So I think there's a lot that the cloud providers can teach companies that has nothing to do with their cloud. It has more to do with how they survive being a 250,000 person or 300,000 person, or I think Amazon now is almost 500,000 or more person organization, and use technology in every department to make those departments successful. That's probably more interesting to most customers than how to use Cloud SQL to archive data from this other service, right?
Yeah, and I think when you start to get more of these people and groups and skill sets involved, it does change the nature of what actual technologies are we purchasing, because when you start to expand your buyers and the people who are using your technology like that, it becomes a different conversation than maybe what the IT group was originally used to.
Yeah.
For sure,
I mean, just farming out vendor management, even on its own, is a whole complicated thing. What do you mean we need to manage the SaaS vendor to our, a human resources department? What? Like, that's something IT. Oh no, we're going to do this together.
Again, with like all those different users and perspectives, makes me think about multi-cloud. So we have been pretty Google-centric on our conversation. We have been saying cloud providers. But for all these different users and the options, what is your opinion on multi-cloud decisions, like for a company to choose multiple cloud providers because of their needs?
I think this is another one kind of like best practices where like people's definition of multi-cloud is going to inherently color how they see the answer here, because this is one of those ones where you can ask everyone and you'll, as many people as you ask as many answers as you will get. I think in terms of like, if you're in the multi-cloud world of like trying to architect a single application to like fail over across clouds, like that kind of feels like not the best use of resources most of the time. But in terms of like, you have different groups that want to use different services on different clouds, or you have acquired a company that was using one set of infrastructure and it's different than yours. Like, I feel like multi-cloud happens just because we live in a world where we have this bottoms-up technology adoption movement. Like we've seen, like we talked about the self-service nature of cloud before. And because of that, that means that like people are going to adopt the services that work for them. And when that happens, then you have to then figure out how you're going to kind of rationalize that and manage it and add observability and security across all of these different environments. But generally speaking, I think multi-cloud is a reality for most organizations, even though they may or may not want it to be.
Yeah, there's this, I wrote a post a long time ago where we're talking, the example that was top of mind at the time was that Twitter had just signed not only an enormous re-up of their agreement with Google, but a rather enormous agreement with AWS at the same time. And folks are kind of going like, they're dumb. Like, this multi-cloud thing doesn't work, and it's obviously inefficient, and clearly those people are out of their minds. And you're kind of in the corner going like, I've met the Twitter folks. They're not dumb. They actually have like quite an astute technology organization. They're pretty good at these things. I think the reality is that their problem is bigger than yours, and you don't have the context. And at the same time, the cost of the technologies used to cross that chasm is low enough for them that it makes total sense. right? If I go even further up, I spent a bunch of time with George Lee. He's the CIO at Goldman Sachs. They described their platform Sky that consumes 6 major public cloud providers, load balances between them, distributed traffic. Now, he talked about the 10-figure dollar amount that they spent to build such a thing. And I think most companies can't spend that. But I bet you next year it costs $1 million. And then the year after that, it costs 100,000. And the year after that, it costs 10,000. Eventually it becomes obvious. Of course, it will work. So
I would care to guess that most companies can't even name 6 cloud providers.
Right. Right. They're like, wait a minute, what? Right. Like, so, we run a demo persistently as just a nature of the thing. It runs on Anthos. Everybody can get to it. It's anthosdemo.sada.com. It's pretty dumb. It's just a web page. You've heard of web pages before. And if you reload, it reloads on some other service deployment of that, whether it's on AWS or on-prem or GKE or a toaster on my closet or wherever. And invariably, we've done something horrible in operations, and one of those buttons doesn't work. You'll hit refresh. It still loads. The app is still up, but you'll only get the green window that shows GKE, or you'll only get the yellow one that shows AWS. You don't see the red one that's Azure because Azure's gone kerplooey that day. But the app is still up. And I run this with a sort of ragtag team in the corner that pays attention to it once every other week. When more than one of these things is down and crap, we better put it back online so that it doesn't die. So it can be done. And the price point for it has gone down precipitously. I don't think that it is, in most cases, the best way to increase the availability of your service, because you probably have other problems in your services that are way, way higher likelihood to cause an outage, right? The upstream CI/CD system is just one. If that thing pukes and dies and pushes a bad build, the whole thing goes offline. Doesn't matter how many different times I've deployed it, right? So those are the kinds of places where careful analysis of the dependencies and how you're doing risk mitigation, I think, drive businesses to be smart about it. But overall, the cost of this kind of complexity is invariably going down every year. And for different applications, it starts to pencil out as the next most important thing to do.
Okay, I'm going to close us out with a question. Miles kind of hinted at what I expect his answer to be. But for users in the space with all these choices, whether it's multi-cloud, the different technologies, the different tools, software available, what can people look for when they're in the decision-making process to know someone's proven methodologies, to understand like the best practices and the expertise that their new partner may have?
This feels like a very SADA question. I'm going to let you go first. I feel like that's your whole business right there.
Well, kind of. I mean, I think I would just be looking for the examples that they've done it, right? Like we publish testimonials and case studies with customers. If you haven't done it before, it's going to get pretty hard. And particular in those case studies, you're going to want to look for the description that it had not been done before then. Like, have they done the thing that's never been done before a bunch of times and not blown that up? Like, okay, that's a great partner, especially if you think your problem or the issue you're trying to solve is not well understood other places. So, and given what I was talking about in terms of how many solutions there are and how many of them we need, the majority of problems are not well solved today. And that will be true for a very, very long time. So that's the way we think about it.
Yeah. And I think the corollary to that is that are you talking to someone who understands kind of, there are problems that are going to be horizontal across the industry that everyone's going to face. And then there are going to be problems that are going to be specific to your use case, to your industry, whatever problem it is that you're solving. And does the team that you are talking to have the ability to articulate the difference between those? And have they solved, like, ideally they have good plans and good kind of templates, ideally, in as much as that can exist for kind of, here's our horizontal pattern that we want to address. Here's kind of how we're thinking about that. And then here's how we're going to specialize it and to meet your needs. And can you actually articulate that and start to talk through kind of things? And I think the other thing is, do you have someone who can talk about trade-offs with you? Because all technology is trade-offs. And do you have someone who actually acknowledges that and is willing to have kind of those honest conversations around what is and is not going to work, given the path that you're going down?
Okay, well, that was a great conversation, Miles and Rachel. I felt like a fly on the wall of a great thought leadership, insightful discussion between friends. So thank you for the time today, and can't wait for the next one.
Awesome.
Thanks. You. Appreciate it.